we got to talk Knicks because also to quote another FAN host, I got the pulse of the people, and I know that New York right now we want to talk Knicks because let's be honest, I think there's a lot of New York fans, a lot of Knicks fans out there who still are kind of trying to assess this season, trying to assess this playoff performance, and there's a lot to break down and player wise, coaching wise, just so much to get into. But first off, I want to talk Julius Randle because obviously that was the focal point of the entire series, in my opinion. I think Andrew, you would probably agree with that. Um, just like a disappointing performance, and just there's so much to break down with him specifically. Andrew, what stands out?
So I think it's, obviously Randall, like you said it in the open, but, you got to say it again. He was the motor, the engine of this team. And basically, I was saying throughout the whole year when they were 500, when they made on that big run, I was like, this team is going to go where Julius Randle takes it, and that just was the case. And he didn't play a good series, and, he took them to the first round, and that was it. And that's how this team was built. And it worked up until the playoffs. It got them to a 41-31 record, which was great. And again, I feel like with him not playing that well, maybe that was a combination of the Hawks playing really good defense. You got to give them credit for winning the series for sure. And obviously Randall just not playing, so good. I think it's just disappointing. It shows that maybe Randall, I think any star in New York is going to get hyped up a little bit, but maybe, he's not going to be that number one option, probably more of a number three, in my opinion. I just think that's what he's going to be. And again, I feel like this Knicks team and Julius Randle, I think really the Knicks core, in this playoff series was going to have to be Randle, RJ, and probably Derrick Rose, maybe a little Reggie Bullock. And it was really only Rose, and that was really it. And then, that's not going to win you a series. This is not sustainable. And again, the Knicks, they bet on Randle, they bet on RJ playing well, and it just didn't, end up being the case. I think it's great that you saw that. I think it's great to get that experience. And now, building forward, it's definitely great to have that knowledge compared to, if you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, I think the biggest concern, and maybe this is kind of overblowing it, but I can't help but think this way. It's also because I'm a Mets Jeff fan. I'm driven to think this way. Is we've seen it all the time, and across sports, players have one great year. I mean, Peyton Hillis, Cleveland Browns fullback, want to put him on the cover of Madden. Like my biggest worry, and I seeing Julius Randle play the way that he did was great. I love to see it this season. I'm not talking about the playoffs, of course. But he was just most improved player, all-star. Like to see that, and then to come in the playoffs. And here's an interesting stat: since the invention of the shot clock in 1954, only one player has ever taken at least 18 field goals attempts per game while shooting below 30%, and that's Julius Randle. Which is that's how bad he was playing in the playoffs. Yeah. He set an all-time record since 1954. No one has played essentially that bad offensively. For Julius Randle, he basically went from, like I said, an all-star caliber. I think it's debatable. I think some people, I wouldn't have gone this far, but some people are like, oh, is he first team all NBA, second team all NBA? Like, which I think first team is a little absurd, but like to go from that kind of discussion, there was MVP talk, all this, to basically go out there and play like a G League player. I mean, he almost had as many turnovers as assists, like for the entire series. I mean, I don't think it was possible. I mean, I guess one way to look at it is let's say the Knicks come back next year, he plays well again, they make the playoffs again. It'll be impossible for him to play any worse next time. So the bar will be so low, the pressure will be off. But it just to see him play that way, it's just so disheartening. And I'm sorry, it's just creeping into my head. Do we have an R.A. Dickey, a Peyton Hillis, like a 1 year wonder situation in my head? We won't know until next year, but it's just, I can't help but be disheartened.
Yeah, I mean, I think people were talking about this. Kind of the negative is that he had this great season with no fans, and then once the fans started to come back, the playoffs, they have more fans. Didn't play as well. Now I don't know if that's the case or not. He did say, I think in game one, that the fans were just so electric that he was like all his energy was gone by halftime. Like I don't think it's the case. This may be his best year of his NBA career because he had a really good year. I mean, 24 points, 10 rebounds, 6. Like that's an amazing year, and he may never get back to that point. I think he's still going to be like, I don't think he's a 1 year wonder per se. I think he could be a really solid, as I said, a number 3 guy, maybe a number 2. I think the Knicks, if they can upgrade, if you can get like an all NBA great star and replace Randall, I mean, I think you do. But if not, you kind of have to, bring him back, give him the long-term deal, especially, maybe you pair him up with someone else and maybe he's not the only vocal point of your team. You're hoping RJ Barrett, who, look, in his second year, 17 points a game, definitely didn't play good in the playoffs, but, overall, I think he did take a step forward and he's going to obviously, I think, continue to grow. It's just like I think it's always the question is like, who you bringing in, with Randall or replacing Randall, like whatever it is. And that's something that's going to be interesting. I don't think, though, the 1 year wonder, like I definitely get where you're coming from. And especially like he may not, be this good. He may not be this good. And just like, all right, Dickie, he's not going to win the Cy Young again. But I still think he could be, that three, maybe that two. I mean, look, I think he had probably an overachieving season, when you just look at the rest of his career, or maybe he'll continue to get better. I mean, we'll just have to see, but it's definitely like that playoff. So he was a different player. And that was really surprising. You thought that he was coming into his own as a star, and the Knicks, if they won this series, it was going to be because of Randall and all that stuff. And it didn't happen. And I also don't want to overreact because it's 5 games at the end of the day. It's one series. You don't want to make a guy's career off of one series. So again, I think it's just going to be interesting going forward. I think that the Knicks probably will end up bringing him back. I think they'll try to pair him with someone else. I don't think they should go out and like desperately do that. And I think that's going to be the big question for them going forward is that, how like a lot of teams are promising or were promising like the Knicks, and then something happens and it just doesn't work out. I think it's going to be interesting. Will the Knicks be patient? Will they try to be desperate and try to pair Randall with a star? Will they just throw money at Randall and that will be that? And then they just hope RJ gets better. I don't know. It's very, very interesting. And again, going forward, it's like this Knicks team, they built an amazing foundation, amazing, bedrock, but now it's time to build up.
Yeah. I mean, first off, at least Knicks fans, I think Julius is still better than Kristaps. So I think it's kind of a wash there. So I agree. I think it's now about kind of, can you bring in another star? I think Julius, even at the end of the day, he was great in the regular season, but I don't think he was ever the alpha. Like, I don't remember think he was going to be like an elite the best player in the game. You need to pair him up with another star. The question is, who's that going to be? We'll talk a little bit later when we get to our NBA segment about Damian Lillard. But of course, the conundrum comes here where if you're going to try to sign someone like Kawhi, you could do that. But, I think the more intriguing options are out there for a trade. But that being said, if you want to trade to get someone to pair with Randall, you're going to be giving up all the young pieces that you want to keep around. You're going to have to give up quickly a Toppin, a RJ Barrett, who I don't want to give up. I don't want to give up these guys. So it was a really kind of like sticky, tricky situation. I think, honestly, if I were the Knicks, I would not make any dramatic trades right now or in the offseason. I would focus on, let's try to sign some guys. Don't re-sign Alfred Payton. I'll tell you that. Do not re-sign him. I would re-sign Derrick Rose. I think, I don't see him as a starter, but, he was a 6th man of the year finalist, great off the bench. Maybe even re-sign Taj Gibson. I know he's older now, but I talk about a guy. We're giving props to Derrick Rose for this series. I think Taj Gibson, there's a lot of props. First off, Clint Capella had him size-wise the whole series. I mean, he's younger, he's bigger, he's faster, but Taj still gave him a fight for the most part. Even on the other guys, he played well defensively. But just, in terms of some other things about the series that were just kind of like disappointing. Number one, the Knicks had a top 3 defense in the regular season, and they looked lost out there defensively this entire series. I mean, they had no answers for Trey. They had no answers for Capella. It kind of also showed how much they missed Mitchell Robinson, I think, just the fact that they don't have this young athletic guy at center position. The defense got badly exposed. Also, Knicks fans were celebrating crazy, shutting down New York City after that game to win. Let's be honest. The reason the Knicks won a game was because the Hawks were putrid offensively that game. And I don't think it was the Knicks defense there. I think it was just the fact the Hawks couldn't hit any shots. Like whenever the Knicks kind of got in these games, it was just because the Hawks couldn't do anything. It wasn't because the Knicks were playing really well. And that in and of itself was disheartening. The fact that when my team was in it, it was because the other team was playing well, because they were so great. And I said it off the top, and I say it here, at the end of the day, playoffs are about talent. Effort in the regular season is only going to get you so far. It's not going to work in the playoffs, because I think in the playoffs, everyone tries. The talent can kind of go 50% coasting in the regular season. Become playoff time, they're going to go 100%. And your low level guys who are always trying, it's not going to work anymore. So I'm curious to see where the team goes from here. Also, I'm curious what you thought of Tibbs in this series, because from my point of view, I thought, to be honest, I thought you had a terrible series, coaching wise.
Yeah, like I want to make a few points. If like you were talking about Trae Young and like how they couldn't defend him, I don't think there's a point guard on this team to defend him, to be honest with you. I mean, Derrick Rose, and I think Derrick Rose, great offensive player. I liked him on the second unit better. And I know you had to kind of start him just because how putrid Elfrid Payton was. But I think Derrick Rose was so good on that second unit. First of all, kept him just not playing 45 minutes a game, which is obviously a big help. And I think he brought just that energy to that second unit. And, you talk about how the Hawks went cold, there in that second half. Also, I think early on in that series, the Knicks bench was a huge difference with Rose, and they made a difference. Like every time they came in, the Knicks came back in the game. And I think that early in the series, that was kind of how the Knicks were staying in games. They started in game one. It was the jump start to game two, along with the Hawks not shooting well. And then, and then that was kind of it. Then game three hit, Rose started, and then like they'd have a good push in the beginning, then they'd fade down the stretch because the bench just wasn't the same with Rose. So like I would also love to keep him, as that sixth man, but I think you have a huge hole at point guard. And I would like them to fill it in. I think free agency is kind of where you could do it. There are a lot of, vet guards. You talk about Kyle Lowry, talk about a Mike Conley, CP3. I think he'll re-sign with the Suns, but he is technically, out there. I believe he's like a player option, which again, I think that's a huge hole at the Knicks, which they're going to have to, fill there. And then Tibbs, again, I just feel like, he didn't have the best series. I think coaching the NBA, kind of only takes you so far. Like this whole year, he just leaned on Randall. He leaned on his best players, and it came to the playoffs. That didn't happen, and he didn't have an answer for it, which I don't know if you can blame on him or, the players, or just to the Hawks playing well and stopping Julius Randle. I mean, I think coaching only, as you said, coaching and all that stuff only gets you so far. And I think Tibbs, he's kind of known for overachieving the playoff or overachieving in the regular season, playing really good in the regular season. And then in the playoffs, they lose. You talk about even those Bulls teams, they never even made a finals. So again, I think with Tibbs, I think the Knicks did a great job. They built the foundation, and they got to, keep that, going forward. And I think you keep Tibbs until, maybe you're at that level where you feel like you can win a title. And that was my whole thing with Tibbs. If he can build the foundation, get you ready to win a championship, that's his job here. And, we'll see, if the Knicks would keep him after that or not. But again, he did such a good job in the regular season. It definitely was a little disheartening to see, the Knicks just get completely outplayed really in this 5-game set.
Yeah. I mean, with Tibbs, I think the most frustrating thing for me was like we both said, it can only take you so far, but he was just the coaching. But he's just so stubborn. Like he wasn't until game 3 that he finally took Elfrid out of the starting lineup. And, you talk about how he relied on Randall all season, the Knicks, and, people used to get on Carmelo for this all the time, but like, let's be honest, like the whole offense, not the whole offense, but a lot of the offense in the regular season was through Randall. A lot of isolation, a lot of like, okay, Julius, like everyone will draw out.
He's got to make the right passes.
And it's just like the whole series, the Hawks were double teaming Randall. They were getting to him, stopping him from getting to the paint. And it just seemed that like, and maybe you can say this on Randall for not like getting flustered and for not seeing the open passes and stuff, but like, it just felt like there was no offensive adjustment from Tibbs' part. Like, okay, guys, you're going to double team Randall. Let's do this. I just didn't see that. And also like, quickly and Toppin, I know the rookies, but whenever they got in the game in the playoffs, they provided a spark off the bench. Like it was, especially in, in game 5, like when they got in there, obviously the Knicks were down, but you felt a little bit of life. Okay, hey, maybe we have a shot here. And then he almost just threw them right back on the bench. And it wasn't really reading the pulse. And also, like you said, I think Derrick Rose is better off the bench. And, I get it because you can't start Elfrid Payton. But
maybe start like Frank or something.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I mean, I know Frank's like a meme now. I know it's kind of like an inside joke. I like Frank, but let's be honest. Frank is one of your best defenders. And part of the reason why he didn't stop Trae in game 1 is because he was ice cold off the bench. If you start Frank in this series, and I'm not saying he's got to play a lot, at least get him warmed up so that when he comes in later in a defense situation, he's warmed up, he's ready to go. It's just why that never crossed Tibbs' mind. Look, I'm not some NBA coach. I played rec basketball, played travel basketball in 5th grade. I don't really know what I'm talking about. But that being said, like it surprised me that wasn't really a thought. And also another thing with Tibbs, and we're going to touch on the Nets here a little bit before we move into our next segment, just to be fair to the 5 Net fans that exist. The Tibbs, the question is you hear all this talk, you saw like with Jimmy Butler and everything, like, does a star want to play for Tibbs? That's another thing to think about. Like, he's known for riding his guys into the ground. Like, heavy minutes, he's an old school coach, which I like. But in today's NBA, it's all about player coaches. Is that going to work?
I think that he's going to bring them to a point. I think it's going to be like the Nets, kind of, with what they did, and maybe that's not fair to Tibbs, or maybe, like maybe they'll try it with Tibbs, and if it doesn't work out, then they'll fire him. I just like these types of coaches. Doc Rivers is another one. Like these, they're probably the better coaches if you think about it. But you have to manage stars, and stars have to play, for certain coaches. You're kind of seeing it with Dame, which they're Portland fired Terry Stotts, and now it's kind of going to be Dame, making that decision kind of, which will be interesting to see how they go. And just like I don't know if Tibbs can bring this team to the promised land. That was all my whole thing from the beginning. I don't think he will. I think he's going to pass it on to someone that will kind of help manage these stars. I do think that's kind of the way the NBA is going. We're seeing it with the Nets with Steve Nash. Kind of that, former player, understand how stars work, was a star in his own right, So I think that's kind of where the Knicks probably will end up going if this all works out. To me, I just think the Knicks, and they showed it this year, they have the Nets blueprint, kind of. Get, these young players playing well, build a culture. The Nets did that. And like, they didn't even win a playoff series. They won one playoff game, in the 2 years that they built it. And then they brought KD and Kyrie. So it will be interesting to kind of see how this, kind of jives and works out. And, for all the teams that end up like the Nets, they're teams that, don't end up very good. So again, it'll be interesting. The Knicks really do have this fork in the road.
Yeah. I mean, also, with, you mentioned, I do think it's very similar to what the Nets went through when you said it a few years ago. I think Tibbs is a better coach than Kenny Atkinson. So I wouldn't just like get rid of him.
Sure.
But it's an interesting thing to talk about. But